Imagine waking up 40,000 years ago. There is no alarm clock, no phone, no school, no office, and definitely no Netflix. You open your eyes. The sun is coming up. Your group is already beginning to move. And you have a very important question to answer. What are we going to eat today? Because for ancient humans, an ordinary day wasn't exactly ordinary. Every day came with a problem. Find food. Find water. Stay warm. Avoid predators. Take care of children. Repair tools. And somehow make it to tomorrow. But here's the part that might surprise you. Ancient humans probably didn't spend every minute of the day hunting. In fact, hunting was only one small part of their lives. So what did they actually do all day? Let's find out. So first, they had to wake up. That sounds obvious. But waking up thousands of years ago was very different from waking up today. There was no warm bedroom, no comfortable mattress, no button you could press to make the room bright. Your shelter might be a cave, a simple structure made from branches, or a temporary camp built from whatever materials were available. And the first thing you might notice was the cold. So before breakfast, you might need to get the fire going. Someone would collect dry wood. Someone would arrange the fuel. Someone would protect the flame from the wind. And suddenly, the day could begin. Blow from the seas. Then came one of the most important jobs, food. But finding food wasn't always about hunting. Sometimes it meant gathering. A group could search for berries, fruits, seeds, nuts, roots, tubers, or edible leaves. And this could take hours. Imagine walking through a landscape where almost everything around you could potentially be food, but some of it could also make you sick. You would need to know what was safe, what was poisonous, what was ripe, and where different plants grew. That knowledge was incredibly valuable, and it had to be remembered. Sometimes the group would move somewhere else. Maybe the fruit had disappeared. Maybe the animals had moved. Maybe water was becoming harder to find. So ancient humans had to understand their landscape. They needed to know where the rivers were, where animals traveled, where plants grew, where shelter could be found, and where danger might be waiting. In other words, their environment was basically a giant map, and they had to learn how to read it. Then there was hunting. Movies make hunting look simple. Find animal, throw spear, dinner. Reality was probably much more complicated. First, you had to find the animal. Then you had to track it. You might follow footprints, broken branches, dung, scratches, or other signs left behind by animals. And sometimes, you might follow those tracks for hours, only to discover that the animal was already gone. So hunting wasn't just about strength. It required patience, observation, memory, and a lot of walking. Listed go for dangerous, and sometimes you didn't hunt at all. You could find an animal that was already dead. Maybe it had died naturally. Maybe another predator killed it. And if the predators were gone, there might be an opportunity. That meant ancient humans could sometimes get food without chasing a dangerous animal themselves. But there was still a problem. Other predators might want the same meal. So taking food from a carcass could be extremely dangerous. And this brings us to another huge part of ancient human life. Making things. Because a stone doesn't automatically become a useful tool. Someone has to make it. A person might sit down with a piece of stone and another stone and carefully strike them together. One hit, then another, until a sharp edge appeared. That edge could become a cutting tool, and suddenly, a piece of rock had become useful. But tools didn't last forever. They broke. They became dull. They were lost. They needed to be repaired. So part of the day could be spent making new tools or fixing old ones. And the same thing happened with other equipment. Spear shafts needed repair. Shelters needed maintenance. Animal skins needed to be cleaned and prepared. Rope and cord needed to be made. Everyday life required constant maintenance. Good messages. And then there were children. Lots of children. And children weren't simply left sitting around while everyone else worked. They had to be protected, fed, watched, and taught. A child might watch an adult making a tool. At first, they might just stare. Then they might try. Maybe they get it wrong. Maybe they break the stone. Maybe everyone laughs. But eventually, they learn. And that is incredibly important. Because ancient humans weren't just surviving. They were teaching. I mean, topic was a seed of AD or apps to work. A child could learn which plants were safe, which tracks belonged to which animal, where water could be found, how to make a fire, how to make a tool, and when to stay away from danger. That meant knowledge could travel from one generation to another. A person didn't have to discover everything themselves. They could inherit information from people who came before them. And that may have been one of humanity's greatest advantages. Cool. But ancient humans also had to move. Sometimes the entire group might travel. Maybe they were following migrating animals. Maybe seasonal plants were becoming available somewhere else. Maybe water was disappearing. Or maybe the weather was changing. Moving meant carrying things, food, tools, children, animal skins, wood, and anything else the group couldn't afford to leave behind. So even walking from one camp to another could become a major part of daily life. And then, there was something humans have always done: talking. Imagine sitting around a fire at night. Someone has returned from hunting. They know where the animals are. Someone else knows where water can be found. Another person remembers a dangerous place. And someone is teaching a child how to make a tool. Information moves around the group. Stories, warnings, instructions, memories, plans, and probably jokes too, because humans have probably been annoying each other for a very long time. They're mentive. But here's something we often forget. Ancient humans also had to rest. They couldn't work constantly. Walking all day takes energy. Hunting takes energy. Gathering takes energy. Making tools takes energy. So eventually, you sit down, you eat, you talk, you watch the fire, you take care of each other, and you wait for the next day. Quieter, say, a fee. So, did ancient humans have free time? Probably. But their version of free time probably looked very different from ours. Instead of watching television, they could talk. Instead of scrolling through a phone, they could tell stories. Instead of playing video games, they could play physical games. Children could practice skills through play. Adults could socialize. People could make music. They could decorate objects. They could create art. They could simply sit together. And that matters. Because survival isn't just about staying alive. Humans also need social connection. And there is another surprising possibility. Some activities that look like work to us might have been social activities too. Imagine several people processing food together. They aren't just preparing dinner. They're talking, teaching, watching children, sharing information, planning the next day's activities. One task can accomplish several things at once. Food gets prepared. Knowledge gets shared. Relationships get strengthened. And children learn by watching. So when you imagine an ancient human, don't imagine someone spending every waking hour fighting for survival. Imagine something much more familiar. A person wakes up. They get warm. They find food. They walk. They work. They make things. They teach children. They talk to other people. They rest. They eat. They play. And eventually, they sleep. The technology was different. The environment was different. The dangers were different. But the basic rhythm of life might not have been as different as we think. And here's the really interesting part. Modern humans often think of technology as something that saves us time. Cars make travel faster. Machines make work easier. Phones make communication instant. Computers make information available almost immediately. Ancient humans had none of that. So a surprising amount of their day was probably spent doing things that technology now does for us. Walking, finding food, processing food, making tools, repairing things, carrying materials, finding water, staying warm, and traveling. Their world was slower, but it wasn't empty. In fact, their days were probably incredibly busy. Not because they had meetings, not because they had emails, not because someone sent them a calendar invitation. They were busy because almost everything required effort. A meal required finding food. Warmth required fuel. A shelter required materials. A tool required skill. And knowledge required teaching. There was no supermarket, no hardware store, no delivery service, no emergency number. If something went wrong, your group had to solve the problem. And that may be the biggest difference between their world and ours. Modern life hides an enormous amount of work. You turn on a tap, and water appears. You open a refrigerator, and food is waiting. You turn on a light, and darkness disappears. You get cold, and you turn up the heating. Ancient humans had to make many of those things happen themselves. Every single day, zerk. So what did ancient humans do all day? They survived, but not just by hunting. They gathered. They walked. They watched. They built. They repaired. They cooked. They taught. They talked. They played. They cared for children. They shared information. And they rested. Their lives weren't empty. They were filled with thousands of small tasks. And every one of those tasks helped keep the group alive. Good po for how we... And maybe that's the strangest part. When we imagine ancient humans, we often imagine them as completely different from us. But look closer. They worried about food. They protected their children. They made things. They learned from older people. They taught younger people. They told stories. They laughed. They played. They rested together. They watched the fire at night. They woke up the next morning and did it all again. The world around them was ancient, but the people living in it were still human, and maybe that is the real answer. Ancient humans weren't doing nothing all day. They were doing something incredibly difficult